presume, therefore, that you say in your written evidence that you support the TPD
Yes.
provisions in terms of regulation of e-cigarettes. I think it's 20 milligrams, isn't it?
Yes.
As a medicine, and under 20 as a consumer tobacco product. You think that is the best way of introducing regulation into the market?
We support the TPD provisions or recommendations. We support everything they say about the labelling and about quality and about safety of product and uniformity of product. We very much strongly support what they're suggesting about marketing and advertising communications. So yes, we are very much looking forward to we would hope, the introduction of the TPD in the UK.
Okay. So given the TPD regulatory environment, which is introduced at a European level, given what you said about available evidence to sustain then legislation at the sub-European level, do you believe that there is any evidence that would lead a government, here in Wales or elsewhere, to introduce additional regulatory instruments for the use of e-cigarettes? Does the evidence exist either to do what's being proposed in this bill or to do anything else?
I think, well, the faculty would say that we need regulation to ensure that e-cigarettes are used primarily, and perhaps even exclusively, but primarily by people adults who want to give up smoking cigarettes. That would be a medicinal use of e-cigarettes, with all the regulation that would come with medicinal use and with the restriction of availability to the usual outlets for nicotine products, and with the advice and information that goes with medicinal products. That would be the faculty's favoured position. The concern is about the consumer product and the wide availability, the attractiveness to young people in particular, which is a real concern. We don't know what's going to happen.
We don't know what's going to happen in the game tonight. You know, we don't know. We don't know these things, and there is no evidence to sustain the belief that I've got concerns about the way e-cigarettes are marketed and the visions and the imagery that's used, the imagery that is used to promote and to advertise e-cigarettes. I have some concerns about that. But the evidence, again, is that there is no disproportionate use of e-cigarettes amongst younger people.
Yes, but you see, it's the old thing, isn't it? Evidence of no harm or evidence of no risk or evidence of no whatever you just said is not the same as no evidence. It simply means it mustn't be confused.
But the take up is. I accept what you say. By the way, I understand. I understand that and I accept that. But take up is a pretty useful measurement, and if we can estimate the use of e-cigarettes amongst a younger cohort of a population, then we can understand whether the marketing, as you say, towards younger people is actually working or not. Yes. And the evidence we've seen is that there is use of e-cigarettes amongst younger people, and that the overwhelming person, if you like, try to draw a picture of that person who uses e-cigarettes, is somebody who's already a smoker and is using e-cigarettes in order to reduce their smoking.
Yes, but there's been a big increase in the use of e-cigarettes in young people, a massive increase.
Do you have numbers to sustain that?
There will. I don't have them with me. And certainly, if you look at evidence from the States, it's of those who have tried cigarettes or who smoke cigarettes at least once a month. I think it's something like a quarter of them have used.
That's the Los Angeles.
Okay. Any other members with questions? I got a couple of quick questions. John?
We touched earlier on the issue of the harm of e-cigarettes to the user. I think we were told that there's one estimate that it's around about the level of 5% of the harm that would result from smoking cigarettes. There are various estimates, but that was one that was mentioned. First of all, would you accept that that's about right? And if so, does it follow, in your view, that when somebody using an e-cigarette exhales in an enclosed public place, there is likely to be harm to whoever is present and breathes in that exhalation, if that's the right word?
Yeah. On the first one about the reduction of risk by 95%, or the figure you mentioned, I think again that's questionable. I think you can cite evidence either way. More evidence is needed, really, as to. But everybody agrees. We'll certainly sign up with a consensus statement that you'll be familiar with, that using e-cigarettes is much less harmful to the user than using tobacco, definitely. No question of it. What that figure is, and what percentage reduction is questionable. But it is substantial and very useful, very valuable. The question of whether or not the exhaled vapor is harmful to others, again, very short of data on that. I mean, you can analyse chemically what there is in there in terms of the solvents, the propellants, the flavouring, what happens to them when they heated to high temperature, what level is of carcinogens, etc. What we do know is those levels are pretty low. It depends on the space you're in, of course, and how concentrated the stuff is. Those levels may be enough to aggravate symptoms in somebody with asthma or with congested nasal passages, or perhaps even allergy. But we don't know. That work needs to be done. We just simply don't know what the long-term effects of that is.
Okay, thank you. Go on, Kirsty.
You just said, Professor, that we don't know. The justification for the state imposing restrictions on individual liberty when the original tobacco regulations were brought in that stopped smoke in public places wasn't to do with the harm that smokers inflicted upon themselves, but actually was a step to protect the public health of other people.
Yes.
The person behind the bar, the person waiting the table, the person sitting next to you in the restaurant. That was the justification for the state imposing restrictions on individual liberty.
Yes.
Given that you've just said that there is no evidence that the vapour that is exhaled by a person is damaging to other people's health, do you think it is right for the instruments of the state to impose restrictions on people's individual liberty in that way?
You make the state sound really terrible, but anyway.
It can, yeah, it can be. Absolutely. Yeah. I've got inbuilt suspicion of the state.
But that question of proportionality is one for the state to decide, as it were, for Welsh Parliament to decide. As I said, because we don't have evidence of the long-term harm, doesn't mean to say there's no long-term harm. We simply don't really know the extent of that yet. It's more than zero. I mean, there are particulates in the atmosphere. There are in the atmosphere. We know that some of those toxins, like formaldehyde and others, are carcinogenic, potentially carcinogenic. So the level of danger to others has gone from zero to something. We don't know what the something is. That's the problem. I think why the faculty agrees with the proposals is that there is this significant increase in risk. We don't know how much it is, but it's there. We don't want to do anything to undermine the good work that's been already done, which you mentioned, that the state has helped to protect the people, which is good to hear, around tobacco, and we don't want to see that undermined by introduction of this unknown quantity that which could. So that's why the faculty is supporting this proposal.
Can I ask a question and clarify a point? Are you of the view, or the faculty of the view, that because of the lack of evidence of safety and because perhaps the lack of evidence normalisation, you were taking a precautionary view in relation to e-cigarettes and their use in the public places?
Exactly so.
Okay.
Just if I wouldn't go as far as Kirsty in the sense of the state, but I think that's probably a fair analysis. But I do, but in terms of proportionality of this, the evidence we have is that there will be, and there probably are, the elements that you've described in this vapour. There probably are. But they're at vanishingly small levels. And that there's a greater threat to your health tonight walking through the city centre with the exhaust fumes from not just Volkswagens but all sorts of different vehicles spewing out all of that dust and particulates into the atmosphere than you would be going into a pub, sitting down next to somebody who's got an e-cigarette. And so the proportionate response of the state would be to remove those cars from the city centre, not to remove that person from the pub.
Well, you could argue that a proportionate role of the state would be to remove those cars from the city centre and remove the vapours from the
Not
pub.
on the evidence we have, though.
There is some pollution there. We don't know how much, and we don't know how harmful it is. So, as a precautionary measure, both.
And on that point,
Okay.
I think we've... Thank you very much for your evidence this afternoon.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
You'll receive a copy of the transcript.